Industry. Thank you, all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for day 2 of FE Pharma Summit 2022. I am Nikita Jain, your host for the show. We so appreciate you joining us. Let's kickstart the lovely day with a special day themed Indian Pharma, the Opportunity in Adversity story. India Pharma has seen a tremendous growth and shift during the past 2 years. At the same time, the struggle also has been humongous. While we have gained scale in making generic, Indian companies still do not have a global scale and impact when it comes to drug ingredients and key starting materials for making the medicine. And many times, Indian companies are dependent on China and on third party subscale makers within the country. Indian companies are still dependent on other countries. Not a great thing. But are we learning to move on? Moving on to our next session that talks about rare diseases. Recently, rare diseases have received worldwide attention. The developing countries have fallen seriously behind it in regards to awareness, drug development, diagnosis, and social services. You would be surprised to know that India has one third of the world's rare disease population. Like in other cases, pharma companies have a pivotal role to play even here. To set the record straight, we have amongst us Dr. Ramaiah Muthyala, President and CEO, Indian Organization for Rare Diseases, for a special address. Dr. Ramaiah, the stage is yours.
On behalf of the Indian Organization for Rare Diseases, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar, Pharma Summit 2022. On this occasion, to benefit those who do not know us, it is my privilege to say a few words about our organization. We are a patient organization representing 90 million patients affected by 7,000 rare diseases. It is an umbrella organization established in 2005 as NGO, the oldest patient organization in the country. Our vision is to see that the patients with rare diseases have equal opportunities to lead a quality life, same as patients with common diseases. Our mission is to raise awareness, advocate public policy, and promote diagnosis and treatment for rare diseases. Until the late 1990s, the phrase rare diseases or orphan drugs are foreign to many of today's stakeholders in India. We found from our sample survey in 2019 that 27% people with college degree, including NRIs, never heard these terms. For most of my adult life, I interacted with pharma industry in India and abroad. They were also unaware of the orphan drug market until very recently. However, things have changed, at least in India. In 2015, after late President Kalam spoke about awareness of rare diseases, we believe that this event sparked the interest of many stakeholders, including the government. Our work, that is collection of knowledge, is part of a significant collaborative effort, a global network with US, Europe, Canada, Japan, China, Russia, South Africa, Singapore, etc., and the international organizations such as RDI, EPADO, ICORD, NGO Committee for Rare Diseases. We thought we could apply our collected knowledge for policy drafts and other rare disease issues in our country. However, it became evident that such an information is not suitable for our country due to cultural, economic, social differences. Remember, our healthcare budget is less than 2% for 1.3 billion people. For this presentation today, I will not be talking about awareness, diagnosis, prevention, newborn screening, public health measures, basic research, genetic disorders, biological therapies, etc., related to rare diseases. I will focus only on one thing, that is, orphan drugs are priority for equity. Although the wants and needs of rare disease patients are many, for this talk, I present that we already have in our hands rather than what we don't have. The latter is much longer list, and I reserve this discussion on it for some other occasion. Over the years, multinational pharma companies have enjoyed blockbuster drugs, as it is no longer the case. Without exception, they all have turned their attention to orphan drugs. What are rare diseases? There are many definitions for rare diseases, depending on which country you belong. ICMR defines a rare disease as less than 2 lakhs in India, while CDSCO defines 5 lakhs. India's population is 130 crores. It is 4 times USA, 5 times European Union, 10 times Japan. It would be ideal to have a definition of our own that is suitable to India. Why do you need a definition for rare disease in the first place? The answer is our drug regulators need a definition to recognize the drug is for rare diseases and make them eligible for government benefits, if any. US Orphan Drug Act 1983 was built on their definition, not more than 200,000 patients, and it became a global gold standard to many countries to formulate their own policies, rules, and regulations. Orphan drugs are drugs to treat rare diseases. While rare diseases individually affect less than 1 in 2,000 people, there are so many individual rare conditions, they are cumulatively everywhere, and a few hundred patients per disease. Duchenne muscular dystrophy, neurofibromatosis, Huntington disease, and thousands of other conditions with names you have never heard. Collectively, a minimum of 6% of people live with rare disease, equating to 500 million patients globally. 80% of rare diseases are genetic disorders. Often, these diseases are undiagnosed, they are nameless, they are medical refugees without a home or state. On average, it takes 5 to 7 years for the child with a rare diseases to get a correct diagnosis. Only 5% of rare diseases have treatments and not cures. The government is doing what it can and has dealt with many burning issues. However, it can do much more if they understand the problems rare disease patients are facing. Here I recital what Prime Minister Modi said last year. India's pharma industry is an asset not just for India, but for the entire world. It has played a leading role in reducing the cost of medicines, especially for developing countries. Such statements put added responsibility on our pharma industry. Now, let me talk about the national health policy for rare diseases. Ministry of Health and Family Welfare drafted the national health policy for rare diseases treatments 3 times in the last 5 years. It is a complex issue. Due to the time constraints without details, let me first say the correct policy deserves to be amended. The policy is drafted with a borrowed definition of rare diseases from the USA. A count of rare disease patient is necessary for any country to draft the health policy. When authorized patient registries are not available, the number of patients in the country can be estimated from various sources. For example, placing a question in India's census, which takes place every 10 years, or collaboration of public, private, and corporate hospital registries, or primary healthcare centers such as Anganwada and ASHA workers from remote rural areas. These are just a few suggestions. The expert committee for drafting health policy can be benefited if a member of the umbrella patient organization is included. Complex as it is, attempted to solve the entire problem at once with short-term goals may not be right way to address major problems, starting with a small problem, but an important one at a time, with a long-term objective is suggested to formulate national health policy much better. Next, Drug and Cosmetic Act. Despite this surge in product development, approved treatments are available only for 5% of estimated 7,000 rare diseases, closing the gap between available treatment options and the need for patients living with rare diseases requires navigating issues and obstacles typically not met with current pharma settings. Small patient sizes, incomplete knowledge of disease pathology and natural history, and the lack of established clinical endpoints make it a challenging ordeal for any industry. The obstacles are even more significant for developing biological products, which account for 40% of the orphan drug applications designated between 1983 and 2019. Biologicals or biosimilars themselves a topic of discussion for some other time due to lack of time in this session. In 2017, just 5 years ago, for the first time, I repeat, for the first time, our Drugs and Cosmetic Act was amended to include the terms rare disease and orphan drugs. That happened during the time of Dr. Ishwar Reddy as DCGI. This amendment is very significant, as you will see later in my presentation. It is substantial and the beginning of progress for orphan drugs in India. We cannot thank you enough, Dr. Ishwar Reddy, wherever you are today. Another milestone, new clinical trials rules 2019. The Indian clinical trial market was valued USD 1.93 billion in 2021 and is expected to expand at the compound annual growth rate of 8.2% from 2020 to 2030. The key factors estimated to drive the market are the globalization of clinical trials, new technology in clinical research, growing diseases, variation and prevalence, increasing R&D promoting clinical trials, outsourcing, etc. Globally, the clinical trials market was valued approximately USD 38.2 billion in 2020, and it is expected to reach USD 51.5 billion by 2026. Globally, more than 400 marketed orphan drugs and more than 1,300 orphan drugs are undergoing clinical trials as we speak. Rare disease treatment market size exceeded USD 144 billion in 2019 and is expected to grow over 12.2% CAGR between 2020 and 2026. The growing prevalence of rare diseases, their healthcare expenditures have augmented the demand for unique treatments. Thus, it positively affected the growth of the orphan market. India's Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has published the first version of New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules 2019. Keeping various issues in mind, the new rules have been thoroughly revised. The most critical issues are those aimed at reviving the clinical research industry in India, which got set back in 2013, benefiting the patients and the pharma industry. Here I highlight only some clinical trial rules pertinent to rare diseases only. The clinical trial rules provide helpful guidelines to import the new drugs for sale or distribution. Local clinical trials may not be required for imported orphan drugs, while MSME pays 50% of concession fee for new drug approval. No application fee is charged for orphan drug approval. Special status, namely fast track and accelerated approval process are given to the clinical trial application of rare diseases. The sponsor may apply to the licensing authority for the accelerated review process without all 4 clinical trial phases. The clinical trial phase 4 study may be relaxed for rare diseases for which drugs are not available, are available at high cost, or it is an orphan drug. Normally, 90-day review period for a clinical trial review is reduced to 30 days for the orphan drugs. Another important provision is many products for rare diseases never make it to phase 3 studies. They are often proved after phase 2 studies when an appropriate biomarker reflects the positive response. Therefore, placebo-controlled clinical trials is excluded. Now, I bring to your attention a new Office of Orphan Product Development. Let me say something important in this context. For those who have not seen the Clinical Trial Rules 2019 document, it is 118 pages long, and the term orphan drugs was mentioned only 5 times. The point is that many academic and industry people are not aware of the problems associated with the rare diseases, and finding the information is quite challenging. It is a identity crisis that lack of name recognition and not because lack of information. Therefore, because of these and many other reasons, we propose having a dedicated Office of Orphan Product Development under the CDSCO system. This suggestion received positive comments from the Ministry of Pharmaceuticals and Niti Aayog and pharma associations and pharma companies. Letters of support from managing directors of many Indian uh, pharma companies were sent to DCGI. We thank them for their assistance. We also request others we have not sent their supporting letters yet. We think such an office should be feasible without additional resources, as the DCGI website already lists departments, help desks, telephone numbers for medical devices, diagnosis, biological, etc. I acknowledge the support of the Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance for their support in this case. Further, the function of this office is to evaluate and develop products such as drugs, biologics, devices, medical foods that show promise for the diagnosis and treatment of rare diseases. In addition, such dedicated office answers questions about orphan drug designation, rare pediatric diseases designation, humanitarian use device designation, clinical trial grants, translational research centers, etc. It is essentially a one-stop shop. Next, PLI schemes is another topic of interest. We believe the incentives listed in clinical trial rules are a step in the right direction, and it is the beginning. The necessities of the COVID pandemic on the imports of vital raw materials for pharmaceutical production, Ministry of Pharmaceutical initiated production-linked incentives, popularly known as PLI schemes. We are delighted to note that orphan drugs received the eligibility criteria to be included in the PLI schemes. Thanks to the Pharma Association, Federation of Pharma Entrepreneurs, for proposing it to happen. Now, while US Orphan Drug Act incentives apply only to new drugs, not many Indian pharma companies qualify for incentives of the US Orphan Drug Act. A majority of Indian pharma are generic drug manufacturers and need incentives specific to generic drug producers. In view of this, in 2018, we proposed certain incentives specific to generic drug manufacturers with the support of the Bulk Drug Manufacturers Association of India. Some of these proposal incentives are grant programs for clinical trials given to small and medium-sized pharma and biotech companies, R&D tax credits, subsidies to orphan drug biologics, government procurements, legalize the changes in the intellectual property management, etc. We believe that while satisfying the demand domestic needs, the orphan drug market will expand globally as more than 80% of rare disease population is outside India. We also propose to have a system of repurposing old drugs to develop orphan drugs with new indication. Here is my last word, but important one. Across India, our organization plays a crucial role in raising the attention and catalyzing support for 90 million people living with rare diseases. Our shared responsibility is to ensure that no person living with a rare disease is left behind. We need to be pragmatic in our responses to these unfortunate people. I mentioned earlier, 3 decades ago, the term rare disease did not appear in Indian literature. Until a decade ago, the term rare disease did not appear in the United Nations docket even though United Nations was established in 1945. After 75 years of its establishment, on 16th December 2021, the rare disease community reached a historic milestone with the UN General Assembly adopting a resolution on people living with rare disease and their families. We have a powerful message of support and recognition in the form of resolution adopted by consensus of all 193 UN member states. I conclude with a word of personal request. There is a significant unmet medical need for rare diseases. Many socially responsible corporations believe that it is their moral obligation. They view developing orphan drugs as one of the positive public relation benefits besides satisfying their stockholders. It is not all dollars and cents. I urge the pharma industry to highlight current or potential opportunities for integrated international collaborations or public-private partnership to benefit vulnerable, voiceless patients by developing treatment options. I strongly believe you can elevate the rare disease status by making it a global public health priority by encouraging and supporting actions through national and international systems involving our central and state governments, World Health Organization, and the United Nations system. Now, I thank you for giving me your valuable time to listen to me and looking forward to speaking to you again in the near future if you permit me. Thank you.